This is another episode of the Go-to-Market Kickback, the number one go-to-market leadership interview and strategy podcast in the world. And everyone is in for an absolute treat today. Miss Vanessa Goolsby, thank you for joining us. How you doing?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited. You've got a really prolific background in the space of, call it go-to-market construction for growth stage private equity backed businesses, and have done that from a very diverse and very successful career in multiple different areas of the space. The quick highlights, I mean, right now you are an independent go-to-market, one of the best go-to-market and AI growth advisors, former operating partner in some of the world's leading private equity firms, over 15 years as a multi-tour executive across general management, marketing, product leadership roles. You're the creator of what you're now coining as the push framework, and have developed this framework for growth, success, and problem solving, right? In the go-to-market landscape with what, over 100 different SaaS companies that you've engaged with over the years. I've ideated all of these strategies that you're implementing today through your consulting practice. And you've got a book coming out soon that's going to be releasing all the secrets and tricks of this to the world and the general public like us. So I'm very excited to chat with you today. I think we're going to cover off really what you call the go-to-market order of operations for private equity-backed SaaS companies, talk about some of the problems, the what and the why that is, how you were fixing it from a decisioning framework standpoint, and then talk about actual execution, right, of how to instill these values and strategies, right, to make companies more successful than they've been. So hopefully I addressed that all right. Anything you want to add there?
That was wow. She sounds great. So yeah, thank
She
you.
is great. She is great. You
That
are
was a
great.
great introduction. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I've been an operating partner is the term that's, pretty well used these days. I don't even know if it was necessarily that standard 7 or so years ago when I started in this kind of role, but basically an in-house growth advisor of some kind for private equity portfolio companies. And before that, I was with an ad agency here in Dallas, which is where I'm based, and did that for a couple of years where I was able to really focus on customer acquisition at scale. So working with clients like Intuit QuickBooks and Southwest Airlines on, managing just really big budgets and accounts. And then before that, yeah, 15 years in the seat. So general manager, head of product, head of marketing, leading commercial teams. So, when I got to a place about 5 years ago where I was having to advise at scale, I was having, maybe upwards of 10, 15 companies that I was trying to lean in and support at the same time. I needed to create for myself a framework so that I could really manage that many companies and also provide the kind of bespoke, attention that they each need. So like everybody's problems are kind of generally the same. And because I specialize in portfolios that are, I specialize in middle market software. So anywhere between like 10 million to really like 500 million is kind of my sweet spot of company size. So I'm able to kind of start to focus in that regard. And so you hear a lot of start to hear a lot of the same questions, the same problems. Teams are coming up against the same kinds of hurdles. And so the framework was easy to put together, but I didn't realize how well it worked until probably about 2 years in to me running these companies through. And that's really what inspired the book, was just this like aha moment of seeing the results that we're sustaining over the 2 years of running this framework. Anyway, that was kind of a long intro, but
Well,
yeah.
set aside the tremendous amount of successes and accolades, someone from your type of background where you've held a diverse set of remits across, like I said, hundreds of different organizations, right? Through consulting and as an operating partner and as a actual operator. I don't think anything else compiles to be a more sophisticated and articulate understanding of what it means to grow successfully from the executive suite down, and putting this all into your frameworks that we've gone through in a bunch of other conversations and everyone will be delighted that we've got some actual content and part of your deck that we're going to showcase today. I don't think we've ever done that before on the show. So yeah, I'm excited to
Oh,
talk through
great.
it.
Okay, good.
Maybe just set the landscape. What is the push framework? How do you define it? Why is it named as such?
Yes, so the framework started as an order of operations. I would often get called to solve for a problem. Like when a CEO or an investor is bringing me in, they know they need help with something. We know we need help with a campaign plan, or we know we need help with bookings, right? And the order of operations really, I created for myself to help us orient in terms of what sort of where that is in the map of the things that go to market teams typically are doing to turn a prospect into revenue. And so that order of operations has helped tremendously just in terms of like how I'm able to quickly diagnose and bring the team along with me in terms of like, if you're here on the map, then this is largely, the area that we're going to need to probe and dig into. And maybe this is a good time. I don't know if this is a good time to show one of the slides, but if we wanted to,
Yeah,
probably slide 8 would be would
what's up
be,
here?
a good place to start. And it was like one of the most ambitious. I knew I wanted to write this book because, as I mentioned earlier, I had gone through this process of putting together some case studies. And as I was putting these case studies together, I was looking not just at like the immediate lift that we would see after we would work on an engagement, but I had the ability to check back on companies I had worked on a year or two before. And when I checked
Yeah,
back, I realized you could see in their numbers like when we started our work and the trajectory that was the lift that had sustained. And once I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, we have to tell the people. Like, there is a way to do this. I feel like I had spent the past, whatever was up until that point, like 20 years or so, as a GM, as a head of commercial teams, as a head of marketing. Here I am. I've been advising now for almost like 4 or 5 years at this point, and I'm just now really seeing how all of these activities that we go and do and we get really thoughtful about, we put all this effort behind, how it's the interlocks between these activities and the sequence that we roll them out that's actually what creates the lift. And so I chose probably the most ambitious thing as like the first book to put out because it's so, you look at this framework and you think, oh my gosh, there's so much to it. But there is an order of operations to making a B2B sale. So the order is a little bit of, it connects a few different dimensions, right? Everything that we do as a company is anchored in what we typically call strategy. It almost like hides behind this idea of strategy. But in reality, what that is it's a committed decision. So everything starts with a committed decision. And at the very top layer here, I've identified there's really like 3 starting committed decisions that go to market teams need to make in order for the activities that they do underneath those decisions for them to work, for them to interlock together. And these decisions, they start with the buyer. We're always talking about being buyer first. And I call it that I'm using the phrase ICP. I certainly didn't invent that phrase. And in fact, a lot of what I teach in the book around like how to create your ICP are just very standard practices because the book is not really about the activity of, defining your ICP. It's about interlocking that ICP through execution with all of the other things that you're having to manage to get a buyer to go from being aware of your company to buying into what you're selling and then becoming an advocate. So the decisions are very high level, but they do require cross-functional input. So ICP, that's bringing together, quite honestly, everything here is really oriented to the CEO. So it's bringing together the CEO, the head of product, the head of customer success, the head of sales, the head of marketing, and it's an analysis. So everything is, all of these decisions is a mix of a little bit of gut that gets us started, and then we're going to validate and verify with some analysis. And segmentation analysis is typically, what's used for the ICP. once you have made the decision, so let's say we're still in this like ICP section, right? There's like typically four key ways that teams execute against the ICP. And this is one of the areas, as I was building this, as I was putting this together, it started very simply. It started with like one happy flow to like marketing campaign planning. It was like I kept getting called in to number 12 on the list, right? Like I need help with my marketing campaign. I don't know what's going on. What can we do? And I'd have to probe on numbers 11 and number 10 and number 9 and say like, well, are you scoring the leads? Is there an SLA in place? Is the messaging landing? Are we targeting the right person? Or do we have an understanding of the ICP? And these are terms and phrases that a lot of people understand, but it's the interlocks and how these things connect together is kind of, I think, the new muscle for teams, at least the teams I work with. That's generally the muscle we're building together. Is like, yes, it's important to have quotas, but how do those quotas interlock with your territories? And how are those territories interlocked with your plan to achieve bookings? And how is that interlocked with everybody's contribution for pipeline that they're all going to source in order to fund those, in order to resource those bookings? So all these things like connect together, right, to make a prospect into a customer. But it's a pretty dense topic. And I chose to write it to CEOs, which is like, they barely have time to read a long form email. So like, how do I do this in like a bullet form way? It's like very,
Can I inject a question here?
yes, please.
Why do people come to you in this previous life, right, at step 12 if the other things are so obvious? Like, where's the miss from a foundation building standpoint? Like, are people just moving too fast? Are they not
I
read
mean,
up enough on this?
yeah,
Like, why does it get so long without the foundation being laid?
I think a lot of teams are doing really excellent work in checking off these boxes. Like, do you have personas? Yes, we have personas. Do you have an ICP? Yes, I have an ICP. Do you have a marketing campaign plan? Yes, I have a marketing campaign plan. But where teams, and frankly, I think that some of this had to become an aha for me just because I think I had to work on enough companies for me to even see this clearly. But where teams typically don't have that experience already in their back pocket is how these things connect. It's in the connection. Like we talk a lot, there's a lot of lip service around this idea of like marketing and sales alignment, right? And what does that mean? This is what it means. Like it means not just agreeing to something, but executing together. And so a lot of these elements in this like secondary tier of execution are elements that are pulling in from multiple teams. And the way that we're pulling in from multiple teams is that we're starting with these decisions at the very top. So I don't think, I think with teams, I think that's where the fuzziness comes in because like, look, we've got a marketing campaign plan and we've got personas and we've got an ICP. So why isn't it working? Well, the reason it's not working is because you don't really have the engine put in place. You just have the carburetor and you have the transmission and you have the fuel line. And that's as far as I can take that metaphor. but but that tends to be the connector that at least I can help provide.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, the OKRs, to skip to the end of this, seems like one of the
Yes.
most consequential elements of this, right? Defining the CEO's path to growth and what the actual execution looks like in reality for them. Maybe walk me through the steps of how you get to that, and then what does
Yeah.
that look like in practice to you?
It's funny because OKRs, even before I had fully fleshed out what this framework was going to be, I knew OKRs had to be one of the earliest, first top decisions that teams needed to make because it's the CEO's roadmap to growth for the over the hold period of a PE-backed company, but you can assume that to be 3 to 5 years. And so it's like the high level strategic priorities of the company, and everything we do needs to latch on to that. Otherwise, we lose focus and we start to dilute our own impact because we're not all walking in the same direction. Now, what's interesting about OKRs for this book is that this book, I chose to start this idea of like putting out the push framework with companies going to their first 100 million because it's a very foundational place to be. And it's one of the most, frankly, for me, it's one of the funnest transformations. So I was happy to start there. But because I started there, the OKRs, like when the CEO is putting together their company objectives and they're cementing in what the key result measurements are going to be, and they're talking with their team about what kind of milestone activities need to ladder up into these objectives over the course of, 1 to 2 years, that decision for many CEOs going on that path to 100 million kind of needs to be informed a little bit by some of these early builds. So if I had written this book for companies over 100 million, OKRs would actually come first because you've already had enough of the foundational pieces built that you are a little further along in terms of understanding what the unlocks, what the growth levers need to be in order to achieve whatever, target you're looking to do. But when you're a CEO under 100 million, you tend to need, like, this framework positions it as like the fourth decision because now you have already built some muscle with your team and you've been able to uncover along the way some of the gaps you're going to need to fill over the next 12 to 48 months, or 12 to 24 months with the team under this guise of OKRs. So here it's a little bit different, but the OKR process is, frankly, I think of it as like CEO project management. Like, you have no more than 3 to 5 strategic priorities that you want to accomplish in the year. Frankly, when I have this conversation with CEOs, the questions they usually ask me are around, like, how do I even make an objective? Like, how do I know where to land with an objective? And that question is very different for a PE-backed company that is going to their first 100 million versus a PE-backed company that is going to 1 billion versus a bootstrapped company, right? Those are all like going to be very different sources of objectives. The way that I've written the book is it's for PE-backed CEOs. And so I'm giving you some ways to connect back in with your investor and your operating partners to surface some of the materials that may not have been shared externally from your firm, but they have, to help inform some of your objectives. Like, what was their investment thesis? Right? Like, what did they seeing as the growth levers? What was the value creation plan? And these are seeds that you can start to use. These are not just people's opinions. This is based on market studies, deep diligence, expertise. Your investors bringing a lot of that pattern recognition to you. It's one of the reasons why you chose the investment path, is so that you can leverage some of these insights. So this is how you leverage those insights, is in an exercise like this. But you're taking this, and in this framework, then you're going through the three big go-to-market decisions with your team. And once you get to this like third, this like very prerequisite decision to an OKR, this like idea of like setting your contribution model and understanding how to connect your pipeline sources from within your market to feeding your bookings target. In that conversation, you raise a lot of growth levers that are very specific to your business. So that's why it's number four. Number four, because early on, you're getting all of your inputs from your investor. You're getting things like your exit targets, and you're getting an understanding of the market study, and you're getting all of those inputs in for your objectives. But by the time you walk through the first three decisions of this framework, you've also brought that strategic idea down to the growth levers that need to happen immediately this year in your business in order to even achieve, a 30% CAGR, for example.
Yeah. Let me pull this down for 1 second. Tell me, give me maybe a micro case study of a very common instance of when you would come in and want to execute sort of these ideologies in the private equity backed business. Like, what stage of revenue are they at? What are the general expectations, milestones, and sort of resources that they have at their disposal to be able to achieve that as the precursor
Yeah,
to implementing some of this stuff? Then I want to talk about, that 100-day plan that we've gone around.
that's great. A there's like three great times to leverage a framework like this. This framework was built specifically for companies that are between 10 to 100 million. Because at about 10 million, you tend to have a CRM in place. You have experimented enough with sales that you understand some of the green shoots of what investment can unlock for you. Like now maybe you're going to turn on channel partners, for example, or you're going to, build a different feature set in your product roadmap. So we start at 10, so just so we have enough resources to make this framework work. It would be a far different framework under 10. And so the three areas, and PE backed is very helpful as well, because the book, it does pull in a lot of the investment side. Like part of my point of view is I've been lucky enough to be kind of an observer of both sides of these conversations for the past 7 years. And so I saw a lot of opportunity to improve the communication between the investor and the management team. And just things, they don't know on either side. There are things that they just don't know because they haven't sat in each other's seats exactly in those ways. And so the ways, like the places that are great places to use a framework like this under that guise is certainly funding has closed and you're ready to deploy and you've got a 100-day plan. This is really this can be a very foundational build where you really are just starting from the first decision, you're knocking down your executions and you're just working down the whole framework. Another time that this becomes really relevant is if you are doing a lot of M&A or if inorganic growth is part of your investor's thesis for your business. This is a good time is when you have an add-on that you've just acquired and you need to integrate that go-to-market motion in with yours. This is where, again, all of this is about interlocking and aligning groups and teams. And so the framework works really well for that. But personally, one of my favorite and most exciting use cases is when there is a mid-hold turnaround. You're experiencing some decline, you're not really sure why. Maybe you have a new CRO that's joined, or you're expanding into a new market, or you've been doing things the same right way this whole time, but you just can't get to that 25% growth rate that's on that your investor's asking for, and you're only maybe seeing like 10%, right, or 15%. This framework works really well in diagnosing and like with some precision getting to what we need to fix, and then what are the all of the dominoes that need to be reset in order for you to get back on track. And in that way, some case studies that come to mind are, they really are around this idea of like a mid-hold turnaround where, you know, maybe we're seeing some stagnant. We had one, I've had one client where over the course of the hold, they had somewhat lost product market fit, right? And it's a they knew they had a whole plan on turning that around. The features and functionality, they understood the rollout, they understood like what was going to need to happen on the product side. But meanwhile, we still needed to improve and increase, right? Pipeline of bookings. And that's really tough to do when you don't have a market that is really receptive to what you're selling. And so they came to me for a marketing campaign plan. They came to me for bookings, actually, like we need help with bookings. And so we started to work through we did a quick diagnostic to identify like what was healthy, what was unhealthy, and like where the interlocks were missing. And we identified that one of the key things here was really around this idea of like not just a marketing campaign, but this idea of like marketing campaign sales enablement and differentiating the message with a point of view, just like a unique point of view, because we couldn't really differentiate on features yet. And so keeping the conversation going became sort of the theme of the project that we were doing, but how we kept that conversation going with the prospects had to be distributed and amplified through both sales and marketing. And the way we do that is by interlocking a lot of these activities.
Let's talk about how this actually works in practice. I think we've got a couple of other slides that go through this because it sounds wonderful, but I know it's not an easy task as much as you make it out to be as the expert to get these leadership teams aligned, communicating to each other, focused on the right types of ideas. Let me pull this back up, and I think this might guide us. But walk me through like how do you define and help founders or CEOs, particularly new CEOs coming into a turnaround business or someone that's just gotten new funding from a private equity group, and show them what does good look like, without necessarily being specialists in this area.
Yeah. Slide 10, I
Cool.
think,
So
is a good slide for us to focus on here. So, every person that you bring into your business is going to need to go through some form of discovery, and I'm certainly no different. And discovery can mean a lot of different things. The way that I like to approach discovery is largely through a self-assessment. So it takes about 15 minutes for the team, and I'm providing for them in under these categories, these specific areas. I'm providing for them what good looks like, and I'm asking them to self-assess based on what I'm showing you as the definition of what good looks like. Do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? If you do, you get a 3. If you kind of do, you get a 2. If you don't, you get a 1. And then we talk through where we're seeing a lot of the ones. Because remember, this is all in order of operations. And so if you're seeing a lot of ones in the beginning of the framework, then that's where we focus. And if you see a lot at the end, then largely, then we just know where to direct our activity. It's not to say there's no such thing as perfection in execution, right? We are really just trying to get to progress and just continual improvement. And so we just need a place to like help us anchor on where to focus. Because a lot of times these questions are like, here's what you really know. You really know that you have a bookings decline. You think it's because of the campaigns. You think it's because the reps are not being trained. You think it's because, you might have a lot of ideas of why this is happening. And it's really tempting for teams to call in an advisor or their operating partner at their investment firm and say, I have a problem with sales. Like I have a problem with BDRs. But until you can kind of assess, like, well, let's look and see how the whole system, like where in your engine, right, is the problem. It might just be showing up in the BDRs. It might be, something that's happening before then. It might be in how the leads are getting routed, right, for example. So that's what the assessment does. It's very simple. And then there's certainly a deeper dive that we do on the back of what comes out of that, just to like check, with some data to see, like, confirm what we're hearing from the team. But this gives us a quick way to jump in and start making changes. Once we have this diagnostic done, we create, like, out of the back of this diagnostic, we'll create a project plan that takes anywhere between 1 to 3 months. Usually, it's very rare. In fact, I'm hard pressed to think of an example where I had to work with a company for more than 3 months, but it's about 3 months, and it's an all hands on deck, right? So the way that, at least the way that I work, is I'm kind of coaching weekly and oftentimes multiple times a week with the leaders of sales, with the leaders of marketing, rev ops, their teams. And we're knocking through all of those things where you scored a 1. We're just closing those gaps, and we're doing it all together. That's really important because, again, it's really less about the activity. It doesn't really matter if your personas have watering holes included, right? And it's more about the interlocks of, great, have the reps been trained on the how to handle objections? Can they do the elevator pitch? So like that's like, we try to make these things not so much perfect in like it's perfect because a book on persona says it's perfect, but perfect in that it's actionable. Like we are going to see it's going to work. And then there's usually some form of measurement. So we're always trying to include some KPI that relates very closely to the activity we're doing and then to the overall objective of, so if it's bookings, then we're going to look at like pipeline and bookings over the course of the engagement.
what does timeline look like to actually execute, say, after a 3 month engagement with yourself, where you're defining the 4 decisions and the OKRs and aligning on a plan, right, that someone can implement across their organization in whatever capacity that you've defined? What does it look like to actually see meaningful improvements in your business? And what do those meaningful improvements actually get defined as in your perspective?
That's a great question. So my whole reason for being is speed to execution. So we're looking for speed here. Generally speaking, like my engagements are execution. So we are doing the work of execution. It's not so much teaching, it's like doing. And I consider myself like embedded execution support is the phrase I've been using because I'm sitting side by side with the people on your team to help, you know, build. I have templates and primers and we teach and we do and we go like everything is this idea of like everyone gets a baseline understanding of what good looks like. Then we have, if we don't already have a template to use, then there's some sort of decision making template that we use so that we can all come together and make the decision together. And then there is how we execute, which is obviously unique to whatever the activity is, but each of these activities have very definitive ways of executing. And so we do everything that we do follows like that, those very quick 3 quick steps. And the assessment phase, the audit phase, can take anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks. From there, we have a project plan. The project plan will identify basically weekly what needs to be achieved in order to lift pipeline, and bookings is kind of my specialty. So, like, to lift pipeline and bookings. And then we get started. And every week we just knock through that list and we start to see, first, we see understanding, right? And then we see decisions, and then we see execution, and then we see measurement. And for B2B software companies, we tend to see pipeline within that first 3 months. For bookings, we'll start to see the lift, but we won't really get the full sense of the achievement until the full sales cycle has been able to accomplish for that cohort of people that we started to work on, just because of when the timing hit. So typically I'll see the lift in pipeline before, while we're still working together, is usually how it works. And then bookings, I can typically start to get a sense before the end of the 2 to 3 months that we're working together. And then certainly by the end of the next quarter, we have a real read on bookings.
Wonderful. If a CEO, founder, or go-to-market executive is listening right now, which hopefully many are, what are your 2 or 3 actionable takeaways that someone can do right this moment, outside of obviously going to the professional help that you are, right? Which is the
Right.
best scenario, which they
Yes.
should do. And we'll talk about after this how they can do that. But if you were to distill this down into 2 or 3 points, what would those be?
Yeah. I think what I would start with is checking the big four decisions. So, are you clear on your ICP? And what does that mean? Do you have a solid understanding of the deal size? Not necessarily the average deal size, because that can be misleading, but like the median deal size, the typical predictable deal size of one of your deals. Do you have a clear understanding of how your market segments into cohorts of buyers that are likely to buy from you, whether that's SMB, mid market, enterprise, or by different verticals? And that's your ICP. Like, do you have a clear understanding of your ICP? And then, secondly, does your company have a predictable way of working a lead when they get one, right? Like, if you're a CEO, how much confidence do you have in the dashboarding you're seeing coming out in your own board reports? Like, when you're hearing your head of sales and your head of marketing tell their stories, are you thinking, whew, we really pulled this one off? Or are you thinking like, yeah, that's exactly right. Like, I understand, you know?
How
And
common?
oh, I mean, and it's funny, like, this is the beauty. And if anyone is listening who's an operating partner, you can fully appreciate this side of the story. But like, how lucky, right, to be at this like almost like catbird seat, because you can really see, you help the teams develop the board slides, so you understand like how the narrative came together or lack thereof. And then you also are sitting in on the executive sessions and with the investors, so you understand how it's being received. And a lot of the book actually was inspired by that gap of understanding on both sides, because a lot of like, I remember I was talking to one, I won't even say the title so as not to call anyone out, but I was talking to somebody on a management team, and we had just had the board meeting, and then I was still coaching the team. And so I had my weekly meeting with this person, and I said, I'm really surprised that you didn't include, this very specific data that most companies include. And he said, well, I didn't want to call it out. And I thought, oh my, I was like, your investors sit in this meeting 100 times a week. So they know it's missing. You have to call it, you have to address it. The idea is not that
Yeah.
people are expecting perfection. They're expecting you to be accountable. They understand things are going to happen. You have to be accountable for being for showing up to address those things when they happen. But yeah, it's pretty common. Like, for teams to like, it's almost like a little show that they're putting on every quarter instead of an actual path that they're walking for the next
Yeah.
3 to 5 years, right? And that's really the difference. That's really the difference. But essentially, so you can ask yourself your questions around like, how clear am I with the ICP? Do I trust that there's predictability in if I put a marketing dollar out into the world, or if I invest in BDRs, or if I turn on channel partners, that we're going to have a predictable engine of turning that investment dollar into customers? And then, do I know what to do if I had another $100,000? Would I know where to put it? And that's the contribution decision. So, like, these decisions are, if you can't answer those three questions with confidence, then you probably, then it's time, then it just is a lack of like integrated strategy across your go to market team, is what that really points to.
Well, this is incredibly insightful, Vanessa. So thank you for sharing all of this. I would implore anyone listening to reach out to you. You've got a couple different avenues where people can lead to finding more, right? Your upcoming book, your push workshops, the content you're publishing on LinkedIn. I think someone with the sophistication and articulation of thought around these topics, coming from the diversity and the density of background that has proved countless times successful. I mean, there's nothing worth more if you're in a growth stage private equity backed business than looking into this, right? And properly exploring this very deeply and very intently. So thank you for sharing all of that. Where can the people find you? What are actionable next steps to learn more about the push framework and potentially working with yourself?
That's great. I have to say, I mean, it's almost like Doctor Heal Thyself, but like my website's being made. So coming soon to a URL near you. I will be at vanessagoolsby.com. For now, LinkedIn is probably the best way to reach out to me. And I'll tell you, if any of your listeners would like to take that self-assessment, I'm happy to share that. If you just want to send me a DM on LinkedIn, I'm happy to do that. It's going to be something that will be available on the site. I just haven't gotten there yet. So,
Excellent. And the push frameworks in the book, I've got this pulled up. You've got quite a few workshops.
yes, workshops are in kind of endemic to growth advisory. The ones that I have listed here and the ones that'll be featured on the site are ones that, they hook into the framework. They're the ones I typically run somewhere in the framework should we, find it that that's the gap to close. But they're really great ways for teams who, you have the people, you have the smarts, you have the expertise, but maybe what you're missing is that like guided decision making just so you can get to execution faster. And so some of those are around ICP, like how do you start that segmentation analysis piece? The SLA, this is probably one of the most powerful ones for CMOs, where you start to build your pipeline conversion process. So when you hand a lead over, you have confidence that it's going to be worked in time. You understand how attribution is going to be reported on. You understand, what the rules of nurture and sequences are going to look like. You understand lead scoring and quality. So it covers a number of different elements, but essentially it's everything that your teams would need in order to have confidence that those dollars that are going out to promote are going to turn into revenue. And I won't go through all of these, but there's a number of these that, are very specific to the book, and then a little that are adjacent, but still very helpful. One of the ones I was just doing this week actually is customer journey mapping for LTV, which is one of my favorite workshops because we really go stage by stage and we start to uncover for ourselves, what questions are the buyers asking, and those turn directly into email subject lines for your nurturers. and we identify like cross-sell indicators, and that turns right into the checklists that are going to become part of your sales governance. And so we're able to, with everybody in the room, we're already getting that like early buy-in for like change and improvement. So that's a real fun one. And so
And then the
workshops,
book,
handy. Yeah. And then the book is coming out
the
March
biggest piece, the
24th.
coup de grace.
I know. I can't even
Very
believe it.
exciting.
Even
It takes a lot. People underestimate
it
the
takes a
amount of
lot.
work and time to put these in. So I
Yeah.
know you've been working very diligently and
For
very hard on
years.
this.
This has been a work in progress for years. And I'm still, even just yesterday, I was still going through like interior pages with the publisher. So it's like, I can't read this thing anymore. I told her, I was like, I don't know if I can see this anymore. like like these words just like they're not even landing. I've
Where do
seen
I
it
get
so
my
many
signed
times.
copy?
Yeah, definitely getting a signed copy. So this is available on Amazon, anywhere books are sold, Barnes and Noble, all of the places in easy search. And yeah, I'm really excited. This is going to be, I think for me, a really fun story to tell. And I wrote it so that because it's such a dense, like there's, I didn't just choose one topic. I should have just chosen one topic. It would have been so much easier to just talk about like the SLA, right? But the truth is that the SLA in a vacuum doesn't work without the rest of the pieces. And so that's why things don't work is when you're missing those interlocks. So really excited to get it out the door, really excited to share it with everybody. It works. The reason I wrote this is because I've seen it work consistently. And so I thought, oh my gosh, this is frankly like this is what I want an MBA to look like. Like this is the program, right? If you want
Yeah.
to run a commercial team or you want to be a CEO of a PE-backed company that is going to bank on commercial success and growth, like this is how it works. So I don't know. I'm just really excited to put this all together.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for sitting down and sharing this with us today, Vanessa. Thank you, everyone, for listening to another episode of the Go to Market Kickback. Every way you can reach out to Vanessa, all of this wonderful content, the upcoming book release. This is releasing in March, so this will be later this month. We'll post about that again on LinkedIn, accompany with some of the content from this. And yeah, I'm sure a lot of people will take away a lot of good things. So thank you.
I hope so. Thank you for having me, Joey. This was fun.
All right. We'll be back again soon. Thanks, everyone.